Janet, thank you very much, and to the League of Women Voters, thank you for inviting us to be here with you today. We're delighted to do that. We've spoken to several groups throughout the state as we've been doing the work of the commission, and it's always a pleasure for us. We've gone into this whole process, believe it or not, with an open mind, with an idea that we don't know all the answers, but there are a lot of people in this state who've been working as you have for decades on matters of justice, not only in the criminal justice system, but throughout the state. And so it's a real privilege for us to be here with you. We're expecting to leave a substantial period of time for you to ask questions and to make your own observations, to share your ideas with us. We'll be taking notes of those good ideas and taking them back to our colleagues on the commission. And so it really is a treat for us to be here. I think the way we'll handle this is John will start off and spend a few minutes describing to you where we are in the state with respect to our prison population and how we got into that condition. A little bit of his experience and expertise on what it is that really happened that produced a prison system that's got now about 45,300 prisoners in one of our 25 adult prisons. Those prisons were designed to hold approximately 32 to 33,000 inmates. As bad as that sounds, it's actually an improvement. When we started this process a little over a year ago, we were over 48,000 offenders in the system. So while we've relieved that overcrowding pressure just a bit, we've got a long way to go. And we are very proud to be a part of this group. Governor Rauner is genuinely committed to his stated goal that we find a way to reduce the state's prison population by 25%. So roughly 12,000 offenders fewer than we have in the prisons at the time that he issued the order is our goal. But it's also important for us to do that safely. It would be easy enough to just take 12,000 offenders and transfer them to local facilities and say, oh, we've achieved the goal. But that doesn't really accomplish anything, and we know that. So we're looking at everything from the process that causes someone to misbehave all the way through the arrest and diversion and or prosecution scenarios, and then what happens while you're in the prison, what happens when you're on some kind of supervised release afterward. We are interested in any of the ideas that could help us achieve that goal. So I'll let John talk a little bit about the history of where we are and how we got there. Then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about what the commission's been doing, and then we'll open it up for, I hope, a round of very robust questioning.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I want to thank Janet for inviting us to be here. Also, when I was driving in, I saw that Cindy Canary was on the agenda. Is she still here today, or she leave? Oh, so when I think of the league, I think of Cindy Canary. I interned for her, 10, 15 years ago. Very briefly, I don't think I was a very good intern, but I learned so much from her. She's definitely someone I think about a lot in terms of what it means to be a strong advocate, and so it's a real honor to be here and especially be associated with anything that Cindy Canary has been a part of. I also want to recognize Elaine Nekritz, who's in the audience. She's definitely one of the best, most effective legislators in Springfield, and the kind of legislator and public official we need to ultimately drive the kind of changes that we're talking about. So I want to kind of lay out. So my goal here is to lay out a sense of the history, kind of where we are, how we got there, and how the commission is trying to address and improve outcomes. And to start with, so I used to be an English teacher, and it's kind of how it's hard for me not to fall into a teaching mode. So forgive me, and if I'm going too long, just give me the axe and I'll stop. But whenever I think about this issue, and especially presenting it to a general audience, I think about the temptation I think a lot of us have, that we want to simplify this issue, right? Crime is something that's, it feels like it should be easy, right? Punishment should be easy. But there's nothing easy about punishment, and there's nothing easy about the criminal justice system. And I think about a quote from one of my favorite poets, Marion Moore. She said that it's human nature to stand in the middle of a thing, or it's human nature to stand in the middle of a thing, but you can't stand in the middle of this. And I think so it is with the criminal justice system. You want to get in our prison system today. We want to stand in the middle of it. We want to say, okay, here's the answer. Here's what went wrong. And in reality, as Rodger Heaton mentioned, and actually it speaks to the diversity of our commission. There's nothing simple about this issue. The policies are even the seemingly simplest issue. The fact, for example, that when inmates leave the Department of Corrections, they do not have easy access to a state ID, which forecloses opportunities and basic requirements of their parole conditions. That seems really, really simple. And the reality, though, is that fixing it's really complicated. So the policy is complicated, but I think what's not complicated, and what's something I want to hone in on today, is which should unify our work, which is the moral reason we're doing this. We have a system. The United States leads the world in incarceration. We have about 2.3 million people in our prisons. We spend more than $70 billion a year. This is not only, again, internationally unique, it's historically unprecedented. We are out of whack with our own traditions. And this is a burden that falls particularly on poor people, particularly poor people of color, in certain communities across the country and in Chicago and other parts of the state, Peoria, Rockford, East St. Louis. The criminal justice system and prison in particular can be a normative experience. So while we talk about the policies and the need to be very careful about unintended consequences, I think we can start from a kind of foundational assumption that what we have today is wrong, and it needs to change. So I want to give a couple kind of stories about our prison system today. So before I took this job, I was the executive director of the John Howard Association, which is the state's only nonpartisan prison watchdog, and we would visit prisons. That was kind of the core part of our work. So I got to see a lot of prisons and actually how they function. And there are a few stories when I'm doing this work, I keep thinking about, and I want to share them with you. And hopefully they'll give us a way of kind of thinking about the kind of system we have today and why it needs to change. One of the first prisons I visited was Pontiac Correctional Center. And I was there when Pontiac still housed death row. This is when we still had capital punishment. So it was one of the first prisons I'd ever visited. I mean, I'd been as a lawyer, I visited clients, but I'd never been kind of behind the wall. I'd never had seen people inside cages, cells. And Pontiac, for those of you who don't know, it's hour and a half or so west of Chicago. It's a very old facility, built in the 1860s, I believe. It was originally a reformatory for young boys, but it's an old facility. So I went there, and I have a background in wrongful convictions, and so I was kind of interested in death row. I knew a lot of the people. I knew the cases of people on death row. I knew how horrific they were. I knew no one on death row at that point was innocent, for example. And I met a guy, and I saw people there. For those who might remember, I saw Brian Dugan, who was involved in a very famous wrongful conviction case, and it was interesting to see him. Everyone there was had a glassy-eyed look, and they seemed kind of drugged out, as it were. But I ended up talking to a person there for about 15, 20 minutes, who I really didn't know at the time, and it was a really interesting experience. Although he was in a prison cell, he was one of the more kind of charming and seductive people I had talked to. And I remember thinking to myself, as he was making me laugh, I remember thinking to myself, wow, this guy is in my head. Like, he's totally figured out the kind of person I am, what I think is funny, and I just thought he made me comfortable. And I knew it wasn't my job at the time to think about a person's crime. We were there because we wanted to look at conditions. We wanted to make sure conditions were humane. But nevertheless, there was something kind of terrifying about this. And later, and I won't go into his crimes, I later learned this was a very dangerous sexual sociopath who had, essentially a serial killer, had murdered women across the Midwest. And this is the kind of person who I came across people like this in the Department of Corrections at my time with John Howard, where I thought, thank God we have prisons, because this person belongs, and we should treat them humanely, because that's about us, about who we are. But this is a person who deserves to be incapacitated for our safety. This is what's right. And so I had it in my head of just like kind of an overwhelming experience. And literally, maybe about 20 minutes later, a few floors up, we were in the psych ward part of the prison, because Pontiac also, it still does, it used to house death row. It houses people who are seriously mentally ill. And so, kind of reeling from that experience, we go into the psych ward, or the psych part of the facility, and people, again, very kind of drugged out. They're doing some group therapy here and there, but I couldn't concentrate because in the background there was a man yelling, screaming. There are dead babies in my cell. There are dead babies cooking in my cell. I said it over and over again. So as we're trying to kind of talk to various people, we just couldn't concentrate. So finally we asked the psychiatrist there. We said, who is this man? And what's happening here? And the psychiatrist kind of had a depressed, fatigued look. He said, well, this is Mr. So-and-so, and he's very seriously ill. He has schizophrenia, and we try to give him medication. When we can, we try to put him into group therapy, but really, this is really the best we can do for him. And I didn't know anything at the time, and I thought, well, that doesn't seem right. But I thought, at least in the back of my mind, I thought, well, he's probably like the guy downstairs. He's probably done something very horrific, and maybe this is the best thing we can do for him. So I'd actually never done this before or since in my time at John Howard. I was so kind of moved by this guy, and I wanted to know who he was. I ended up looking him up. And to my surprise, he wasn't a serious offender. He hadn't committed a violence offense. He was in there for a property offense and was due to be released in a few months. So I tell that story because I think it's really important. We use our prisons and sometimes the same prison, right, to incapacitate the most serious, violent, dangerous offender, and then someone who is not chosen to do wrong, someone who is seriously mentally ill. Same staff, same facility, and there's something wrong about that. And I want to tell one more story, because I think together this will kind of encapsulate, the problem we're facing in the Department of Corrections. And really, the problem that we're facing in Illinois is no different than the problem we're facing as Americans. We have done something to the criminal justice system. We've used it to respond to problems that prisons cannot possibly address. So a few years later, my time at John Howard, I was visiting Vienna Correctional Center. This is way downstate. It's almost in Kentucky. It's actually a very, very beautiful part of the state. Vienna used to be the crown jewel of the Department of Corrections. It was an educational prison. Literally, sociologists, educational specialists wrote articles about Vienna. It was a place at the time when it was first built in the late 60s, early 70s, that inmates could earn their way into to teach classes. When it was first built, they had no prison wall. People from the community would take classes with the inmates. Inmates had a CIT, or like a crisis unit, where they would service the area. Inmates would umpire baseball games. So this was like this kind of rehabilitative ideal when it was first built. Today, at the time, and certainly today, still, it's one of the most crowded facilities in the Department of Corrections. Quite literally a warehouse for the lowest of low-level offenders. And when we were there, we were getting correspondence from inmates and their family about how conditions were really, really bad. So we wanted to see them for ourselves. And they were bad. This place had not been taken care of. The facility was in magnificent disrepair. But one place in particular, Building 19, which was kind of a barn-like warehouse, we went to. And when we walked in, it was kind of a place where they had inmates who were in portable bunks. It was a room not unlike this, with kind of glass way up on high. And when we walked into the room, there were about 500 people. Again, pretty much like a room like this. So imagine about 500 people in portable bunks. There was one staff who was kind of in the corner. There was a broken TV. The windows were broken all around because people were throwing stuff out of them. There was, mice, feces, bugs. There were like cockroaches. I couldn't paint a more, depressing picture. And I kind of walked in there, and there were people, and they didn't have anything to do, so they would just kind of walk around like this. And I was kind of looking at this like, wow, this is really something. And the staff next to me, who was kind of leading us around, just on his own said, "This is horrible." And I couldn't. I was like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "This, like what?" He's like, "This shouldn't be." That was from correctional staff. So I think those stories, the most serious offender. Oh, I should back up. The people in this room like this, they weren't. So these were low-level offenders. The people who probably committed multiple offenses, but people who were there for things like driving on a revoked license, retail theft. Now, I don't want to, misdescribe this. This is repeated times. It's not like one time. But nevertheless, this is what it left me. This is why I always think about Vienna. Vienna Correctional Center is our best answer as a state for that kind of person, for a person who's that kind of offender. Even though these conditions were decrepit, they were bad for staff, they were bad for inmates. They're not cheap, right? On average, it costs at the very lowest level, I guess, without factoring in pension and other kinds of costs, more than $20,000 a year to house someone in the Department of Corrections. When you load in all the real costs, it's more like $38,000. So that's our answer to people who are kind of constant recidivists, low level people who need some kind of response. And I remember thinking then and thinking now, well, right, that kind of offender is a problem. That's not the answer to it. So that's our prison system, and at least that's the way I think about it. And again, I think what, Illinois, I think Illinois is one of the larger prison systems in the country. It's not so unique, though, in these ways. So here's the question. How did we get this system? How did this happen? And I think what's really important when I ask that question is to realize it didn't happen. Or it did happen. It wasn't always this way. Prison can feel like it's something kind of ahistorical, that it's always been with us. It just, how else could we do things? Prison itself is in terms of human history, is a pretty recent phenomenon. Really, the United States kind of built prisons. We used jails before, other kinds of detention. But prisons, the idea that you'd send someone away to be corrected in a kind of in a closed facility, that's more or less a unique American invention. And in fact, this is something that kind of right around the time of the Revolution, people were experimenting with in Philadelphia and New York. In the 19th century, people came from across the world to see how we were doing it. There was really something really impressive about prisons. And for most of prisons' histories, I don't think it's particularly a good history, but they were fairly small things, meaning we didn't necessarily hold a lot of people in them. I think if you go back and read the history of prisons, you'll see, I think conditions have always been problematic. Prisons are kind of, by their nature, problematic places. But I think what's important is we didn't kind of have the system that we have today. As Rodger mentioned, in Illinois, thankfully today it's gone down, but still 45,000 people in a system built for 32,000, right? Again, in the United States, 2.3 million people in prison. For most of the country's history, we had very low levels of incarceration, very comparable to Europe. In some ways, it was even lower than Europe. And what's more, especially beginning in the late 19th century and throughout most of the 20th century, the goal for prisons was to rehabilitate people. That's why we called them corrections. Right? I mean, that's where the name comes from. And prison and crime itself was seen for most of the 20th century as a kind of almost like a medical issue, as a kind of social disease. And the point of sending someone to prison was to kind of correct them, to give them treatment. And that's why during most of the 20th century, including places and states across the country, including Illinois, when people were sentenced to prison, they weren't given a fixed period of time. They were given a range of time. So someone would be sent for 5 to 10 or 15 years. And the goal was once you were there, you would receive treatment. And there'd be some kind of board that would yearly examine you and to say, okay, well, what's changed? Are you better? And once you could demonstrate that you've corrected yourself or whatnot, you would be let go. But the whole goal there was it was rehabilitative. Now, I don't think it necessarily worked that way. There were lots of problems with prisons in the 20th century before kind of where we are today, often called the era of mass incarceration. But there was a rehabilitative ideal that guided the use of prisons. And that began to change in the 1960s. It changed with a lot of things. There was a deep skepticism about institutions in general, began in mental health. We began deinstitutionalizing mental health. In fact, it was kind of interesting irony. A lot of the asylums we used to have in Illinois are now prisons. So we saw this kind of opening up of the of mental health asylums. Around the same time, beginning in the late 60s, crime began to spike. There was a significant political unrest. Manufacturing jobs began going away. Crime spiked. And so even though as we had a system that was rehabilitative and fairly small, conditions on the ground seemed to dictate that we needed something else. And then began kind of an appetite to change how we use prisons, to move from a rehabilitative, indeterminate sort of system, a smaller system, into something more punitive. And so in Illinois was one of the first states that did this. It abolished determinate sentencing. Right? They thought that was the problem. There's too much discretion built into this thing. If people go to prison, it needs to be for a fixed period of time and dedicated principally to the goal of punishment. And this is something that kind of happened again across the country. In our state, it happened in the late 1970s. But crime still began to rise. And so we continued to use prisons more and more. And we did two things beginning in the late 70s. Things that were, again, fairly unprecedented. We began expanding the number of crimes to which you can go to prison for, right? Low-level crimes that before would be probationable. And we also began to deepen our use of prison, to extend the amount of time someone would serve in prison. Around the same time, we not only thought of prison as the best answer to crime, we also thought of prison as the best answer to drug use, kind of the so-called war on drugs. And so from the 70s to the 80s, these two trends were kind of moving in lockstep. At the same time, this was a very turbulent time in our history, for criminal justice-wise at least. Crime would spike and go down, And then in the late 80s, early 90s, we saw a horrific spike in crime, particularly violent crime. In Chicago, for example, I mean, we're definitely dealing with a spike in homicides. In the early 90s, we had almost 1,000 murders in Chicago, more than double that we had last year. So out of this spike, it's understandable that people were desperate. They were looking for answers. Prison felt like the right answer. It felt like if we use more prison, we should be able to tackle this problem. And so we embarked upon a real radical expansion, especially for more serious offenses. In the 90s, through a series of legislations, mostly through what's called truth in sentencing, we effectively doubled our use of a sentence length for serious offenses. We doubled our length of sentences for serious offenses. Now, the interesting irony in all this, politics always lags behind, kind of, I think, where the culture is, where events are going. So even as people across the country in Illinois were making these changes, crime was beginning to drop precipitously. Beginning in the early 90s, again, before we really started making these changes, crime started going down in Illinois and across the country. But because we had so expanded our prison system, we began to see how we broke it. Right? Prison, primarily, I think everyone will mostly agree, prison should be an instrument of crime control. And so when crime goes up, prison a little bit should also go up. When crime goes down, prison should follow it. Because we imprison for so many offenses, and because we imprison now for so long, crime has gone down, our prison population has gone up. Right? It's out of whack with crime. That's a sign that we've done something wrong. But I think it's important not to think about these kind of policy historical terms. We have to think about who we're incarcerating. For most people, probably people in this room, certainly for myself, prison, the criminal justice system is not something I have to think about too much. I do because it's my job. For my children, I have 2 kids. I don't think about prison for them, the criminal justice for them. But as I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, prison, the criminal justice system is a normative experience of people's lives. It's how people actually experience government. It's how people understand citizenship, particularly in places in our state, in our country, that already have significant clusters of disadvantage, poor health outcomes, poor education. Prison is kind of layered on top of that, and it's how they understand their involvement in our society, the very nature of their citizenship, and it's highly concentrated by race. In Illinois, we have about 13% of people in our state are African American. African Americans count for almost more than half of our prison population. Again, that's horrific. It's also pretty common across the country. So I've described this system, and I'm going to turn it over. We want to open it for questions, but I want to kind of end on a positive note. Now, I was walking here today, beautiful day outside, and I think it kind of awakened in me the sense of optimism and hope of where we are today. I think right now, so I've been in this work for 10 years or so. In the last year or so, I've never seen the kind of possibility for change. I never would have guessed we would have a governor who had made it one of his early goals of his administration to reduce the prison population by 25% in 10 years. I would never believe, earlier this week, I was at a panel hosted by the ACLU and the Illinois Policy Institute, right? An organization on the far left and the far right arguing for prison reform. I never would have believed that. I think we are at an historic moment in our country. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really think hard about the system we have and the changes we need to make. I think it's not unlike perhaps the moment of abolition of slavery, when women were given the right to vote, the civil rights in the 1960s. People are asking hard questions about the system we have. And I think people understand that this issue is really complex, even if you don't know it intimately. I think everyone intuits today that something's broken about how we do criminal justice. I think it's what's driving it is at once a kind of sense of perhaps cynicism and skepticism, but with that is significant possibility for change. That's why I'm so delighted to be here. I'm so delighted to work with Rodger Heaton, because I feel like this is the moment we're in, and these opportunities don't present themselves very often. And with your help and through the commission, I believe we can make recommendations that, not simply get people out of prison. That's not what this is about. If we're, as Rodger mentioned, if we're just about letting 12,000 people go, we should fold this thing right now. What this is about, ultimately, is rebalancing our criminal justice system, recalibrating our use of prison. One, so it's more consistent with our own tradition, our own sense of justice, our own Constitution, which calls for sentences to be proportional to the offense, but also restore citizens to useful citizenship, but also fundamentally more fair. And I think together we can get there. So I gave you a history. I hope it's kind of useful, but I'm more interested now in what you have to say. And I guess, Rodger, you have anything to add to my spiel?
Just briefly, yeah, please. I think that applause is well deserved. You can see what a resource John is to the commission, how fortunate we are to have somebody who's lived that kind of deep personal observation of the prison system and who understands not only what's happened here in Illinois, but what goes on and what's happened across the country. So we're very fortunate to have him among our group. Let me just tell you a little bit structurally about how the commission has functioned, in part so that you can understand the work that we've done, but also so that you can make your own suggestions to us about what you think we need to do going forward. This group of roughly 25 to 30 professionals from all across the state, all aspects of the criminal justice system, is really a tremendous asset, a great resource to me. I'm privileged. I didn't select these people. I'm very thankful that the folks who did the selection for the committee or the commission knew who the best and brightest people were across the state. But we took the commission and we divided it into 5 different subcommittees. And so even though the full commission meets about every 3 to 4 weeks, and we have a meeting that is focused on a particular subject matter, a particular issue, or a particular area of issues that needs attention, we took the commission and broke it into a law subcommittee that could actually look at specific statutes that exist or proposals for new statutes or modifications to those that we have. We created a community corrections subcommittee that could focus on, what kinds of resources do we have in the local communities that would be plausible or more effective alternatives to incarceration? What kinds of things do we need to do to build that kind of community capacity so that we have community corrections options? We have a budget and capacity subcommittee. One of the things that we've challenged ourselves to do is not just to come up with good ideas about what would improve the way we treat people and their opportunities to move forward, but how are we going to pay for it? What systems do we need to have in place to have sustainable funding to make those good ideas work, not just in the short term, but in the long term? We have a subcommittee on jails because, as I said before, we knew from the outset that it was no solution for us to simply just shift the cost, to shift the problem from the state prisons into the county jails. And so we wanted to have a deep understanding of what actually happens to offenders before they ever arrive at the state prison system. How are they treated when they're held pretrial? How are they handled when they receive a sentence that's less than a year and they aren't going to the Department of Corrections? What do we need to do to make the transition for those who are going to start in the jail system and end up in the corrections, the state prison system, make that an effective transition? And then finally, we have an overarching implementation subcommittee that John is the chair of, because we knew that whatever ideas we came up with, whatever solutions we thought could help achieve the governor's goal, were going to need to be implemented effectively, going to need to be actually measured, tested, have the outcomes reported back. What's going to be the leadership structure and what's going to be the human capital investment to make sure that this all succeeds? So with those subcommittees in place, they began meeting on a different schedule, overlapping schedule with the main commission meetings, and we've done that now, as I said, for just over a year. We also, at one point through the year, decided that we wanted to make sure that we had adequate input from each of the geographic regions in the state. So we took the commissioners and broke into different working groups based on whether they were, Northern Illinois, Central Illinois, or Southern Illinois centered, and tried to have some meetings with folks in communities all across the state. One of the big efforts that we've made is to reach out to law enforcement and to the state's attorneys across the state to have a genuine understanding of what are they already doing, what have they tried and concluded doesn't work, what have they tried and think does work, and if so, are they right about that? Are they measuring it in an effective way? And so the state's attorneys have been a tremendous resource. We've met with the public defenders in the same way so that we could understand what kind of realities they see happening as they represent their clients across the state. We're working with the chief judges in each of the circuits across the state. One of the things that we've discovered, even though this commission is made up of members from all three branches of the government, we wanted to make sure that things that we thought could be helpful, that would really fall within the purview or the authority of the courts when we're done, are we going to have the ability to effectuate that? Are we going to be able to get the probation department, who really works for the judges in each circuit, to buy in? And so we've tried to really cover the bases geographically, by issue, by area of the system. We think that's allowed us to accumulate a tremendous amount of information, which we're hoping to marshal and use in ways to get to good answers. In addition to covering the state of Illinois, we knew that we don't necessarily have all the answers here. There might be other people who've tried some of this with success or failure, and we needed to understand both. And so we've reached out to some national experts. One of the other benefits of having John on the commission is that he has a wide network of friends and professional colleagues across the country. He knows who some of the leading criminologists are at universities across the country, folks who've done the research and written the articles. And so we've been able to bring in a number of those experts to address the commission directly and to advise us informally in some of those working groups or subcommittees. So it's been quite an education. It's far too much information for me to boil it down for you in this short meeting here today. But one of the things that we've also tried to do is to make this process transparent. So we have audio recorded all of the meetings of the commission. They're available on the commission's website. For those of you who simply have nothing else to do, you could certainly go back and look at some of those. But I would encourage you to think about looking at some of the meetings in particular where we brought in those national experts and heard them make presentations to help us understand what the potential consequences, intended and unintended, could be depending on what route we go. One of the things that I'm most attracted to about our work is that we're trying to get all the players in the system to start to recognize that it's overly simplistic if we only focus on the offense, the label, armed robbery or retail theft, because the people who commit those offenses are different from each other. They have different potential for reoffending, depending on how we treat them in the system. They have different needs, whether it's a substance abuse problem, mental illness problem, as John said. They have different things that cause them to behave in the ways that they did in the first place. And so the commission is trying very hard to get a risk and needs assessment approach layered into all of the different decision points that somebody faces as they go through the system. And I think if we succeed with that, and we're not the first people to think of it. It's not as though this hasn't been discussed. There's a statute that was passed back in 2009 that contemplated the use of risk and needs assessment in the state, but it hasn't been implemented very effectively up to this point. We're just now really starting to make some serious progress with that. If we can get to where we think about offenders as individuals and we can deal with their specific risks and needs and continue to take into account what is critically important, the needs and the rights of the victims of these offenses too, I think we can move this system dramatically into a different place. And with John's leadership, helping people not to forget how we got where we are, I think we can achieve this. It's not an easy goal, but the governor seems very passionate about it, committed to it. He spoke to us again at a recent meeting and said that this is something that's going to be an important issue for him every year of his term or terms as governor. It's not something that he expects that we just fix and we're one and done. So I was heartened by that, and as I said at the beginning, we will benefit most, and ultimately the people in the state will benefit most if what happens now, the dialogue, the question and answers, can really be an opportunity for us to learn from you what you see. What have you experienced? What are your concerns? What are your suggestions? And so I'm looking forward to talking about that. Question in the back. Do we need to pass the microphone around, or will we be able to hear it? Keep your voice up.
I think, why don't, for people who have questions, why don't we do as we did before, line up, and then as each question gets answered, I think it's all right.
Thank you both for being here, and thank you for your work. Being at League of Women Voters, I would like to make a really strong push for allowing people who have committed felonies and paid their service to be able to vote.
I'm Jan Kay, as you saw me introduced earlier this morning, as social policy specialist. Now you see why we have to work on our social policies. We have such terrific positions, and we know what happens if we can tend to things early on in the families and in the individual's place. So if any of you want to work on social policies, give me some information. And you don't have to do, if you just give your name to somebody, Jean or anybody, I would be glad to welcome you and ask you questions. So I would really like that. By the way, the governor's wife is in early intervention work. Hence, nice that he wants to do something.
It always comes back to a strong woman.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Mims from the Chicago League. My question is, are there any states that you have observed that seem to have more model systems than we have in Illinois, or elements that you've discovered in terms of how they run the system?
Yeah, and I think, again, what's really important here as we're talking about Illinois system is to realize that across the country, we're all facing this problem together. And so, but I do think that Illinois has legs behind in terms of a lot of the good work being done. You know, Rodger mentioned in 2009, the legislature and the governor signed a Crime Reduction Act, which mandated the use of risk assessment. That just simply hasn't gotten done. One of the reasons that I think at the administrative level, the agency level, we haven't seen the kinds of changes that we would want to have seen is that there really wasn't someone like Rodger Heaton in government. As you saw, Rodger Heaton's been a phenomenal chair of this commission, and I agree with Janet. I don't think the commission would have worked without his leadership, but in his day job, where he spends most of his life, he oversees the public safety system. That's really important because, one of the biggest problems with the criminal justice system is that it doesn't really behave like a system. It kind of has these different silos, and every silo can kind of do its own job. But the problem is when they do their own job in their own way, the system doesn't work very well. So someone like Rodger can kind of have a global perspective of it and coordinate. And I think that's going to be really important going forward. But in terms of states that have done really good work, I think Washington State is a state I look to in terms of that is very good about making sure that programs they fund achieve the outcome they're looking for. They're very good about cost benefit. In some ways, California is both the best of things and the worst of things. They had the Supreme Court essentially force them to reduce their use of incarceration. That is not where we want to go. I am worried that if we don't do it ourselves, that's where we're going to be. But the way in which California addressed, again, too quickly in the middle of the night kind of legislation, they moved a lot of the lower level offenders to the local level, having local communities deal with them. I think that's the right kind of approach. Texas is actually pretty good. Georgia, North Carolina. I mean, there's some state, Utah is doing some pretty interesting things. So what's great about where we are is that we are blazing new grounds in terms of having a goal and a horizon to reduce our prison population. But the tools to do this work have been well developed across the country. And there's states from the left and the right, from the West Coast, East Coast, that have shown us the way to get it done.
No, let's go to the next question. I do have a point I want to make, that I want to hear your questions first.
Okay, terrific. I'm Hillary Dang from the Downers Woodridge Lyle League. When you talk about the percentage of the numbers of people incarcerated, I'm curious if you have a focus on women incarcerated, which is a very large number. It's growing. It's been growing historically. and what the approach is to that topic, and then juveniles that are in our adult population and what percentage there, and if there's any kind of focus on those two populations.
We have been encouraged to focus on the women and the issues that are unique to the females incarcerated. That's important. That's not going to stop. The person who I work closest with and report to in the governor's office is Linda Lingle, who's the chief operating officer for the state. Linda used to be the governor of Hawaii before Governor Rauner persuaded her to join his team. So Linda is passionate about the importance of us recognizing the difference between the way women experience incarceration from the way men experience it. Obviously, we have women who come to prison who are either pregnant or mothers of very young children, and that presents some unique issues. I'll be honest with you, as John said, and one of the hats that I wear is to supervise the Department of Corrections. And I'll tell you that my personal opinion is that Logan in Lincoln, Illinois, the women's prison, one of the two women's prisons, is in desperate need of some stronger, improved, more thoughtful leadership, and we're working on that. Unfortunately, the direct answer to your question about juveniles is that the commission really isn't focused directly on the juvenile justice system. That's another one of the departments that I have some responsibility for, and we're aware of the issues there. We've talked some about the fact that how we handle juveniles, both in the school system and the ones who find themselves in the juvenile justice system, they are the clients of the future in large measure for the Department of Corrections. So we understand the connection between the two. I'd like to think that this commission may get the opportunity, if its life is extended, to focus more on juvenile issues, but the reality is that when we first got our charge from the governor, the expectation was that we would try to address these issues and present a report to the governor in what was going to be about 9.5 months. And most states that have taken on a complete review and analysis of their criminal justice system, their sentencing system, have taken 18 to 24 months at least to address this. So the time pressure was just such that we couldn't tackle juvenile at the same time we were tackling adult. But you're right, Mrs. Rauner is passionate about early childhood education. I think she would be a strong supporter that the governor give us the additional time and flexibility to turn some attention to juvenile too. But for now, we're really focused primarily on adults. And while we're aware of the unique issues with the women, the initial set of reforms that we issued in Part 1 to the report did not isolate or present any particular solution that was focused only on women. I think a number of the reforms that we've suggested be implemented will benefit women as well as men, but they aren't unique to the women's situation. John, do you want to add anything on that? Okay, next question. Representative.
Hi, I'm Elaine Duckritz from the Arlington Heights, Palatine, and Glenview, Glencoe leagues. And Rodger, I don't know you as well. I hear only great things about your leadership on the commission. I do know John for a while, and I think John has been instrumental in nudging Illinois forward on justice reform issues for a very long time. And as you can all hear, his level of knowledge and thinking about these issues is just remarkable to me. So, but my question is on one of my favorite topics, sex offenders. Can you talk a little bit about how irrational our sex offender laws are and what they do to the prison populations, and then is that something that you're looking at as well?
Boy, this is something, I share your interest in this topic, Representative, and I welcome your ongoing participation with us. We do really appreciate Representative Neckritz and her thoughtful leadership in the General Assembly. People like her who understand and work to understand all these issues and then educate her colleagues are invaluable. Discussing sex offenders, and I don't know whether this will be a surprise to anyone in this room or not, is what I would say is one of 2 or 3 radioactive topics. Every time I've sought to bring it up for discussion, I've been shocked by the strong emotional reaction that I get from people in the crowd. But when you get into an audience where people will take a deep breath and listen and really think about the variety of kinds of people who we put in prison for what we call a sex offense, and the kind of people, the variety of people whom we attach the label sex offender, and then start to talk about the details of what effect it has on their lives, particularly their ability to re-enter successfully and become useful citizens again. A thoughtful group of people can realize that this is a place where we need significant reform. We have, for example, 1,200 of the 45,000 plus offenders in the prison system right now who are sex offenders, who have served their entire sentence, who are ready to be released today, yesterday, the day before, who haven't been released. They're serving longer than their sentence that was imposed by the judge because we can't find a place where they can live, where they can be in compliance with all of the rules and laws that exist for sex offenders. Here's an example. You're a sex offender. We don't want you on a computer where you might have access to child pornography. So you can't live in any home while you're on supervised release that has a computer. By the way, your cell phone is a computer, so you can't live in any home with a cell phone, at least a smartphone. How many homes are there like that? 1,200. That's 10% of the goal that we'd like to achieve. All of those men, mostly men, are ready to get out today. So, Representative, it's a great question. Care deeply about it. Most audiences aren't as respectful and thoughtful as you've just been while I talked for the last 2 or 3 minutes on this topic. It is radioactive. John, how are we going to do that?
Well, I think definitely having strong advocates like Elaine Neckritz pushing us to do it is important. Now, the thing, and I think, so Rodger mentioned we have these 1,200 people who have served their sentence. And here's the thing, they're coming out. It's not as if we hold them a little longer, it's not they're going to be there forever. And so, in my mind, I think we should look at the criminal justice system like we look at any entity of government. Just what is the most effective way to get the goal that we want it to achieve? And so when people are returning to the community, that should be our goal. How do we return them safely? Sex offenders is a great example of our kind of very overly simplistic way of thinking about sex offenses and punishing them. And I think too, this is where you really see this kind of dichotomy break up, or kind of start, is that if you're kind of for reform, you're soft on crime. You're somehow you don't want to punish people. You don't, and I think I just don't understand that. It's never really the way I've thought about this issue. I think we should aspire to punish effectively and to make sure that if we're looking to promote public safety, the entire system is geared around that. So I think it's an issue we've got to tackle, along with a lot of other, Rodger mentioned, we're now past the kind of so-called low-hanging fruit, and we're into the land of a lot of radioactivity. But ultimately, the people who go to prison, I think we overuse prison, in ways that undermine our democracy, that undermine the effectiveness of our criminal justice system. That is not to say that people in prison are easy. That means people in prison tend to be there because they're kind of problematic people. But what's the saying? That not if your only tool is a hammer every problem. How does it go again? If your only tool is a hammer, every problem's a nail. That's what prison is, right? And ultimately, we need to have a scalpel. We need to have lots of tools because crime is simply it requires a lot of sophistication.
Next question.
I'm Jan Dorder with the League of Women Voters of Elmhurst. It's a simple question. Where did the 25% number reduction come from? I know it came from the governor, but did the crime rate go down by 25% from the 1990s in your history?
Oh, the crime rate went down more like 40%. No, the 25%. I think it's think about it in two ways. I think, and both are really important. I think 25% it comes out of. So Illinois has, I think, lagged behind a lot of kind of reforms that would have reduced the prison population. At the same time, we have a lot of data capacity, especially built through the Sentence Policy Advisory Council. It's kind of our sentencing commission in Illinois. So we have a pretty, compared to most states, we have a pretty deep understanding of relatively speaking, and kind of going into this work, who's in prison, I mean, we still have a lot more to learn, but so 25% came from that kind of familiarity with the system. And the 10-year goal, I think it was just, it was interesting when we first released this goal. There were two extreme reactions, from some of the more kind of real strong advocates. It was like, what, 25% in 10 years? It should be 50 in 5 years. And then on the other kind of side, it was like, are you crazy? 25% in 10 years? You can't do that. So I think what's important about the goal is that there are lots and lots and lots of ways to improve our criminal justice system, but there are really only a small handful of ways you can actually reduce the prison population. And until you get, the legislature, the governor, a commission to focus really intently on that, it's so easy to go off in 1,000 different directions. And so, the kind of long answer to that question, that's really where the goal came from. It was a way to orient our activity. And I would say, at the time, it was also something I should say, people across the country were kind of talking about, this is what, to really meaningfully reduce our use of prison and safely reduce our prison, a governor needs to do something like this. A governor needs to make a goal like this. And so it came out of that discourse as well.
The only thing I'll add about that is that Governor Rauner is obviously out of a business background. He's passionate about being able to measure performance. And in every aspect of state government now, the directors of the agencies are being told and expected to be measuring performance. And by performance, I don't mean measuring outputs. There's a lot of discussion about it's not good enough to be busy and to be doing a lot of things. What change have you produced? What's the outcome? And so the 25% in 10 years is completely consistent with what he expects every agency director to do. Okay.
I actually have, is this still on? No. Oh, okay.
All right. I have 1,000 things I want to say, but I'm just gonna first let me comment that I'm really impressed and encouraged by your compassion and your competence. Okay, all right. So I do want to say that, and I could talk with you for like hours because we have very shared experiences, right? But I wanted to make two comments, and one is in terms of like the sexually violent. We're not talking about sexually violent persons. We're talking about sexual predators. But I wanted to bring up the Sexually Violent Persons Act, which I assume that you're both familiar with, and it's part of my mission in life to make people know about this because hardly anybody does. And there are a percentage of people that go through your system that cannot be released because they're still too dangerous. And those people come to the mental health system. All right, okay. SVPs, right, sexually violent persons, yeah. So do you have does your group have any involvement with that population, or are you strictly addressing the corrections?
I think technically it probably falls within the broad description of our work, but it's not what we're doing first.
Okay. All right. And to my knowledge, nobody's been discharged from that program, but I'm out of touch with it. I've been away from it for a number of years now. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, which is kind of a cynical comment, which is that I think that the work that you're doing is really good, and it all it all sounds very good. I am cynical about the governor's motives because at this point in time, I'm assuming, okay, he's openly, one of his agendas openly is eliminating collective bargaining. He's holding the legislator hostage over that issue. And I'm assuming that at this point in time, corrections is probably the largest employer. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm assuming that that's probably where the majority of people are working. Union people are working. So I can't help wondering if this isn't, part of this issue. So that's all, just my little, not your problem, just my observation.
Thank you.
All right.
I have Cynthia Shilsky, I'm from the Grange Area League, and I have an observation and a question. The Cook County League has done a study of pretrial services within Cook County. I don't know if you have the privilege to read our report, but we'll be glad to give you one. But I found it interesting what you said about the lack of coordination among the different groups, because that was certainly one of the things that we found in looking at the Cook County system, was that there was very little communication from state's attorney to public defender to chief judge, and all these people are dealing with this system and they never talk to each other. So this is something that I think your group can certainly do, is get people talking to each other. My question is, and you didn't bring this up, and I don't know, this may not be an issue in Illinois, but I thought that part of the issue with prisons was that they were a for-profit. There were for-profit prisons that were built. Maybe this isn't what happened in Illinois, but so it was not in Illinois.
No, in Illinois, we actually have a statute that prohibits having private correctional centers so that we can't have for-profit incarceration.
So that's never been an issue here.
Correct.
Oh, amazing.
On your first point, I want to give some more credit to John, because I think he's too humble to take it for himself. But one of the early and initial set of reforms that we recommended is that we provide incentives and support for the establishment of local criminal justice coordinating councils that would develop strategic plans to address crime and corrections policy in each county. There are some counties out of the 102 that do have effective coordination among the players in the system, but there are many that don't. And John was a strong voice in the commission for us to create incentives to do that very thing, so that there would be strategic thinking, so that people wouldn't thoughtlessly be doing what they thought was their job and not recognizing that because they weren't coordinating with other parts of the system, we were incarcerating people who we didn't need to. So he deserves a lot of credit for that.
So, no, I think this is where the league really has a strong role to play. That it sounds like, I would love to see the pretrial report. But as I said earlier, we call it a criminal justice system, but it's really not a system. And I think anyone who's kind of comes into mild contact with that would be shocked. I say this with, I have respect for everyone who works in this system. These are hard jobs, but this is thoughtless government. And I think a lot of what drives over incarceration is it's just the receiving end of a lot of bad government. And that's unexcusable. So we need to do a much better job sharing information, a much better job making sure that whatever practice we have is aligned with a goal we want to achieve. And really, I'm convinced if we just make government more effective in that way, we can go a long way to achieving our goal.
Yes, ma'am.
Margaret here in Chicago League. Over the recent years, I've read that the rate of uneducated and ill-educated individuals, plus the number of individuals suffering from severe mental illness, make up a significant, if not majority population of the in-prison system. Addressing both those issues are costly. Where does the governor propose to get the money to address those problems?
Great question, fair question. The answer is that we spend right now about 1.4, just short of $1.4 billion a year on the Department of Corrections. We spend another $300 million a year on the Department of Juvenile Justice. That's a lot of money, $1.7 billion. We don't spend it all wisely. And John has done a great job of helping us recognize that while some of the things that we think need to be done will cost money, will cost significant amounts of money, it doesn't have to be new money. And there is an opportunity for us to repurpose dollars that are currently spent in the system to improve outcomes, to improve programming. And it's certainly one of the very first reforms that the Commission reached agreement on, is that there does have to be a dramatic change and improvement in the quality of the programming, educational and otherwise, it's provided across the department. One of the things that I like to tell audiences, because I think it's surprising to most people, and it fits right in with our concern about who we're putting in prison. We have several classifications of felonies in the state. You may or may not be familiar with it, but class 4 is the lowest level felony offense, going on up to Class 1 and then Class X and Super X. Those Class 4 felonies generate about 7,000 new offenders per year out of our 45,000 folks in the prison system. 7,000 a year. The average sentence that somebody serves in the Department of Corrections, by the time they get credit for some of their jail time that they've served before the outcome of their case, they spend about 7 months on average in the Department of Corrections. 7,000 people for 7 months. It takes 3 to 4 weeks for that offender with a Class 4 conviction to get through receiving a classification, medical screening, learn the rules and regulations, getting process for deciding where we're going to put them on a security basis. It takes another 3 months for them to get settled, assigned to, moved to, and settled into their, what we call their parent facility. So now we're at 3 or 4 months into their 7-month sentence. The waiting list for any kind of programming exceeds the remainder of their sentence. So we house them, we feed them, we clothe them, and we do nothing to influence whether they're ready to re-enter successfully. 7,000 a year. It's shocking. We can do better, and by eliminating the overuse of incarceration for those offenders with low or short lengths of stay, we can divert the money that we're currently spending on them to provide the kind of programming that you asked about.
And just really quickly, the point of kind of needed investment. There's no doubt this is gonna require resources, but as Rodger said, I think we first have to be better about the money we spend. So right now in the Department of Corrections, you get a $1.3, $1.4 billion budget. Only 3% goes to programming. That's a horrific number. But I think what's more horrific, out of that 3%, there's a small fraction of programs that have any evidence that they work to reduce recidivism. So, I mean, until we get that 3% right, we can't increase it anymore. So that's where the real challenge is. And I think one more point, and I'm a humanities guy, so numbers I have to have written down or memorized or I lose them. But basically, one of the biggest risk factors, and this is appalling, but one of the biggest risk factors of going into prison is a person's race and their high school education. If you are an African-American male, a high school dropout, your rate of incarceration skyrockets.
70%.
There you have the numbers.
7 out of 10. African-American male, no high school education, 7 out of 10 end up incarcerated in prison.
Okay, I could say amen, amen, amen. I worked for IDOC for 25 plus years. I now teach criminal justice. I'm the only social worker in the group that I teach with. All of them are current or former cops. And I think I bring a little something different to the table, one. Two, when you talk about reducing the population, this is an election year. Do you know any politicians that are running saying they are going to get less tough on crime and going to get elected?
Representative Deckers, they're saying they're going to get smart on crime.
I think she left. I think she walked out.
There's like two.
Yeah.
When we host our forums, that's one of the things that politicians talk about. And it sells to the masses. So how are we going to convince people, or all of us going to convince people that we can reduce the population and get people back into society as productive members?
First of all, let me say, when you're ready to come back to the Department of Corrections, give me a call.
I'm on a retirement phone.
The answer is, it's one of the reasons that we're delighted to be here today. It's one of the reasons why we're talking to groups like you. The League of Women Voters, the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, the Parent-Teacher Associations, everybody's going to have to spread that message, that that's what we want. And the representatives and the senators are going to be emboldened to be smart on crime, not tough on crime, not soft on crime, but smart on crime when they know that the public is ready for it.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing to a magnificent challenge, and this is what has held reform back. And I think what's both kind of hopeful but also depressing at times is, anyone who looks at the system realizes like, oh, this is pretty bad. We made some pretty bad decisions. I don't want to touch them, but they're pretty bad. You hear that from legislators all the time. I think though, I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that even in this very, very, very challenged environment, I think you're seeing a level of bipartisan cooperation that you just haven't seen across the country, but even in Illinois. I mean, I think, who would have guessed? Who would have guessed that? And I think it's just true. This is like the bright spot right now in Illinois politics is criminal justice reform. That's crazy.
You're the first person I've heard say that. That is.
I think it's true. I think because in our commission here, people are hungry for change. I think legislators, politicians, they're intuiting that people do not like the system that we have. They want to see change, and I think it's going to be. We'll see. Like I said, I think we are I think everyone who cares about this issue should realize we are in this kind of unprecedented moment of possibility. So this is where, as Rodger said, we got to push people. We got to push people to be brave. It's going to be hard, but the evidence is there to say that it works, and ultimately we can make changes that will make a better system for all of us.
2 more questions, Janet?
Yeah, 2 more questions.
I recently heard about having people that are incarcerated pay back the money it costs for them to serve. And I don't know if your committee has looked into that, but even they said making small payments, obviously they're not going to pay back $100,000, but I think that, I don't know if the commission has studied that at all or what their feedback is. I'd like to hear that. But then the other thing I'd like to say is, Jean, this is for you. We know that education in Illinois for kindergarten through 12th grade is not funded properly. And just as a note to the governor, what would be great is to see that if you can save money on this criminal justice, then maybe invest into the early childhood education so we can solve one problem at a time. But really, it would be great to see K through 12 funded properly, and then through other savings, add these other programs. As much as I'm all for early childhood education, I just feel like there's other things that we could do for a lot longer time. So,
Very quickly on the financial point, obviously courts have the ability to order defendants to make restitution or pay fines. And under certain statutes, they do also have the ability to order the offender to pay some portion or all of their costs of incarceration. It's a very small percentage, frankly, of offenders who have the resources to realistically pay restitution and fines, which would come first, and then have resources beyond that to pay toward their cost of incarceration. I think, I'll just be direct about it, I think realistically, we've got so many other barriers to their ability to become useful citizens again, to add another financial layer on top of it until we get our system in order probably isn't the way to go. And no, the commission isn't considering ways to make offenders pay for their cost of incarceration. The only possible exception to that might be in the area of DUI offenders, impaired offenders. There's some technology that we've been learning about that has some cost to it, but it might be a type of technology that can keep a person from driving and risking the lives of other people, and maybe we would have DUI offenders pay for that kind of technology as an alternative to incarceration. So in that respect, we might have a piece of it. The childhood education thing, I don't think we have enough time to go into it deeply, and I'm not an expert on childhood education, but I will note that it does appear that the legislature and the governor have been able to reach agreement, at least in the FY16 year, on funding K through 12 education. Whether it needs to be more or less, I'm not the guy to say.
Could I add, there is legislation, Senator Biss is one of the sponsors about this, making people pay for their incarceration to correct that. So, and he's going to be here in one of the workshops.
Last question.
Hi, Sharon Alter, Chicago League. You've given an extremely compassionate reason for criminal justice reform, and I heartily support that. But I have a couple of questions regarding this, and I'll give you all the questions. With a 25% goal, how many correction employees will be eliminated? How much money will that save? And how can we trust that Governor Rauner will use the money saved to reform
the prison system?
Well, I'm a believer in trust but verify, so I think the answer to your question will be the Commission's implementation subcommittee and the recommendations that we make on how to implement these changes needs to make it clear how any potential savings that are generated can be reinvested in the justice system so that it's used appropriately. Your concern is a good one. I think it's important for us to provide some leadership with respect to that. And I think it's frankly a responsibility for all of us as taxpayers in the state to hold the governor and the administration and all our elected officials accountable for how they use those funds. So I would say we understand your commitment and concern, and I think you should hold us accountable. If the governor doesn't do that, then you have certain rights and privileges as a voter to affect that.
I think let us thank our speakers.